Dude, finally, there's there's a Kiss podcast. Can you believe it? Fine. This is going to revolutionize podcasting for sure. I don't think this has ever been done before. There's a podcast about Kiss. All the Kiss fans are going to be so stoked they finally have something to listen to. We're the first that I know of to ever do an actual Kiss. Wait, what? My producer is in my ear telling me that there is already a Kiss podcast. It's called Three Sides of the Coin. Okay. So we're the second. We'll be the second Kiss podcast. Okay. So we'll be. Wait, what? There's also there's also Kiss Talk. Okay. So we're still getting in on the ground floor, right? This is still pretty fresh and pretty. Wait. Oh, and there's also what Pot of Thunder. That's clever. And Shout It Out Loudcast. Okay. And Kiss FAQ. Okay. Right on. And Kiss. Okay. Okay. So we're like the millionth Kiss podcast. Okay. There's a lot of Kiss podcasts out there. So, but hey, at least ours is hosted by middle-aged white guys, right? Okay, fuck it. Let's just start.
Rip and destroy!
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Rip and Destroy, the yet another Kiss podcast.
Yes, it's Rip and Destroy. The fanzine that nobody bought is now the Kiss podcast that nobody is going to listen to.
Sounds like a good time. How are we going to get started? How are we going to set the table?
I don't know. I mean, should we start by, I mean, let's get all self-indulgent and tell everybody how we got into Kiss because everybody wants to know that for sure. That's why they tuned in.
Sounds great. And this is probably going to be the most sentimental episode, if I go so far as to call it sentimental, because the format's going to be a little different. We're going to have a lot of fun at the expense of our heroes. It was the format of the zine that came out in '95. It's going to be the format of the podcast. But having just celebrated the end of the road, I thought it was only appropriate to set the table with the beginning of the road and how our fandom started and when it started and how it evolved over the years. But for both of us, it started really young. What how
Yeah,
did it begin
I
with you?
can I can go first, and I just want to mention that of course we would wait until Kiss is retired before starting a Kiss podcast because why wouldn't we? Um, so yeah, I I started out as a child, and because we all did. No, so I was born in '74, like Kiss. I was born in between Kiss and Hotter Than Hell in summer, and I had older sisters, and of course, it was the '70s that my older sisters were into uh, Queen and Foreigner and Peter fucking Frampton and whatever, and they had some Kiss records, and I was also a little superhero nerd, like. Uh, I was into Marvel comics and DC comics and Superman and Hulk and all that. And I honestly don't know. I don't actually remember the first time I heard or saw Kiss. I just know that they had these records and I liked them and they looked
Mhm.
like superheroes, right? So they had Destroyer and Rock and Roll Over, and I very quickly commandeered those records and just kind of like ferreted them away in my room and listened to them on my little toy record player. And that's basically how I got into it. And I mean, like I liked other, I don't necessarily think that it was just like the visuals or the superhero look that I liked because I liked listening to their records more than I liked listening to the other stuff. So I like their music a lot more too. So, and then, I do remember it being, it must have been 1978 or so. I must have been four. Because I do remember seeing Kiss Meets the Phantom on TV. And so unless that was a rerun on NBC primetime, which it probably wasn't, I must have seen it. It must have been Halloween of 1978 that I actually saw it broadcast. But I do know that it was, um, I was into them at that age because I remember going into kindergarten, right, at age 5 in 1979. Um, and two things. One of the first friends that I made was a kid, in one of the first couple of days, and somehow we're, whatever, playing, doing something in class, and one of us said to the other, "Hey, you ever hear a band Kiss?" And then I was like, "Yeah, I love Kiss," and we became like Kiss buddies. So I know for a
Kind of like
fact that
us.
yeah, I know for a fact that I was already into them in kindergarten, and
Yeah.
then also in kindergarten, I remember doing a thing where, you're learning the alphabet, and for letter of the alphabet, you have to draw a picture, right? So you draw an
Yeah,
apple for A or whatever. And I was either drawing like superheroes because I remember drawing like Batman for B and like Shazam for S. But I know for a fact that when it came to P, I drew Paul Stanley.
love it.
There's, there's somewhere I don't have that stuff anymore. My mom had that stuff in the attic up until I don't know when, but I have no idea where that is. She kept it for a long time, and I wish I still had it. But if you look at if you remember in the zine that we did
Hmm.
30 years ago, I think I put a little picture of my first grade
Hmm.
notebook. I
Hmm.
think I photocopied. Oh, look, you happen to have it right there.
I just so happen to have this. Yeah, I do. Let's see if I can.
Yep, that
There it
was
is.
that was
By the
that
way,
was
that
my
was the zine.
that was the zine. Yeah, it's still nobody's reading it. Um, yeah, that was first grade, and I drew that in my notebook. So yeah, I started early. They started me early. And so, it just went from there. Then I think it was probably around, I think around age 10-ish or so, like fifth grade or something. I got into like comic book like collecting. Like I had always read comic books, but I didn't realize people like collected them, like and like tried to get full runs and you could buy back issues and some of them were
Hmm.
worth money and stuff. And that was when I got kind of bit by like the collector mentality bug. And so by like age 12-ish or so, I'm like, I should collect Kiss stuff too. And I was starting to buy Kiss merch and Kiss magazines and everything. And then I really got into like trying to get all of the albums. And that
Hmm.
was so by age 12, I was already working on the discography. And yeah, and it hasn't stopped.
Love it. Well, if you're going to pick two albums to get started, you could do a lot worse than Destroyer and Rock and Roll Over.
Yeah,
If
for
you had
sure.
grabbed like Unmasked, we'd be doing a Queen podcast right now.
Probably, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So
But that's
kindergarten.
I'm going to tackle we should tackle that subject at some future episode though is I used to hate Unmasked and now it's kind of grown on me in my old age, but
Same.
that's another episode.
I thought it was at the bottom until I actually, and this, I'm sure this will be a future episode as well, when you and I actually listed out every single record in order. And I found out that Unmasked was not the bottom
No,
of the pile for me at
no.
all.
Mm-mm.
So
So, what
yeah,
about you? I don't know
say
that I actually know I don't even know that I don't think I actually know your story.
it's really similar, come to think of it, because my road began in kindergarten as well. It was actually, I do remember the date. It was January 17th, 1980. I was 5 years old. I was in kindergarten, and my routine was always the same. Kindergarten was half day back then. I was in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
And I do the morning and come home, grab a snack, and we had this tiny little TV upstairs, and I'd go eat a snack and I'd watch 3, 2, 1 Contact. And on January 17th, they did the feature on loud music and quiet music.
Hmm.
And they had so much amazing footage from the Dynasty tour. So you always read about how everything went south in 1979 during the Dynasty tour because a bunch of kids started really digging the band.
We were
You're
the
welcome.
kids.
That was my
We were
fault.
the kids, and here we
Yes,
are.
I was totally the kid. And even the 6 minutes they spent on science, talking about how light reflect, it still didn't ruin it because they pretty much showed most of the highlights from the show. So you got to see Ace's smoking guitar and Black Diamond, and you got to see the drum riser go up, pretty much everything except for like blood. So it was kind of like Dubai because it was the Kiss show, but it was blood free
But it wasn't.
and no bad
And they
words.
didn't talk about yeah, virgins.
Yep, yep, totally, totally. And what was so cool for me is even at that young age, what I saw, in that feature was like this amalgamation of everything that I already loved. I loved horror movies, I loved Marvel comics, pro wrestling, and it was kind of like all right there. And I loved music. And to me, it was just nothing short of magic. So I'm very grateful to Trini and the crew at 321 Contact for putting that together and introducing me to the most expensive hobby I've ever had in my life.
There you go.
And then a couple years after that, it was 1982. I was 8, and a buddy of mine, Christian, invited me over for his birthday party. And everybody was doing like birthday party stuff. And we were out on the deck. I was sitting, having a hamburger. And while they were doing whatever they were doing for the birthday, it was always the older brothers that had cooler
Hmm.
records, right?
Totally.
His older brother had Creatures. And I remember, I like it was yesterday. I remember sitting there, literally staring at the record player, totally transfixed by this album. And I went home and I'm like, Mom, Dad, I have to own this, which was perfect because that set me up to, to hop on when it was still the makeup era and I got to get Lick It Up, the day it came out and live that experience in real time.
Hmm.
But the coolest thing that happened to me actually happened in fifth grade because I had a fantastic fifth grade teacher who literally changed my life. Every year she would take on one kid as a project. She'd take like the misfit kid who didn't have any friends and, just I walked around with my headphones on all day and she'd ask me what I was listening to. And of course I said Kiss or Alice Cooper or whatever I was listening to that day. And then one day, it was the coolest thing. She pulled me into the back room and I thought I was in trouble. And she said, "These are my brothers. I want you to have them." And she gave me every single record from the originals through Dynasty.
Shut up.
Yeah, true story. And they were all perfect. All the inserts, all the posters, everything.
What?
And at that time, I had Creatures, I had Lick It Up, I had Paul's 78 record, and I had the Tears Are Falling 45. So like for me, I literally just studied those records. I would get paper and trace their faces without makeup so I could see what they
Everybody
looked
did
like.
that.
Yeah, it was the coolest thing. So, like I said, she changed my life in a lot of ways. Just the coolest teacher I ever had.
Wow.
So that
Nice.
was the beginning of my road.
Right on. So, yeah, I'm trying to think of some other early stories. I know I found at a comic, like a local comic show, like collectibles show, probably when I was 12, 13, 14, something like that. I did get the entire first set of Kiss trading cards for 450. That's $4.50, not $450. But and I don't know what happened to them.
I don't know
They're
what happened
gone.
to
I don't. Yeah, and
the,
I think I know I lost a lot of my trading cards in like a waterlogged roof leak situation years ago, and I'm afraid those might have been a casualty of that. But
mm.
um, yeah, that was because you're not going to get those for 450 again.
Well, actually, back in '95 when I was at the convention and I got the Peter card for some reason that I had that card set aside on my lamp and I stared at it. It made me want to play drums. But when I bought that card at the convention in '95, I think it alone cost me $10. So
Yeah, probably. Yeah, most likely.
yeah.
So, um, yeah, that was how I started. When was the first time you saw Kiss?
First time I saw Kiss was at the convention in Minneapolis in 1995. So
Okay.
my first show was acoustic.
Yeah, which is interesting. And by the way, I still count that among times that I've seen them. I mean, it
Hmm.
counts as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
I
they were there.
mean,
They played.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I
I,
saw
I,
them
I specifically remember Paul saying Kiss acoustic. What could be cooler than that? I'm like, Kiss electric
Kiss
would be a little bit
Electric would
cooler
be,
than that.
yeah, Kiss in makeup and costumes with Ace and Peter would be a little bit cooler than that, but that'll never happen. Um, yeah, and I saw him for the first time in January '88 on the Crazy Nights tour. So I was lucky enough to see them with Eric Carr
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Green Bay.
Super jealous.
Green Bay.
Never got to see them with Eric Carr, and I think Ted Nugent opened that tour. Nugent also opened the
Unfortunately, he did, yes.
yeah the third time I saw them on the first farewell tour. Nugent opened, and that was
Yeah. Yeah,
I I
same.
I I was torn. I really wanted to watch Tommy Aldridge play drums, but I wasn't really digging the rest of the show. So I was literally standing halfway between my seat and the t-shirts.
Yeah. I I've seen Ted Nugent twice and I never even wanted to once. So,
Okay, that was the beginning of the road for us, but my wife asked me an interesting question when I told her that we were putting this whole thing together. She wanted to know how you and I discovered that we were both Kiss fans. I didn't really remember. So before we did the zine, before we did the podcast, at
yeah.
some point, I think probably 93, 94, it clicked that we were both
I
Kiss
think
Army
that's
strong.
yeah, I think that's how our whole friendship started to begin with because we knew like of each other in high school,
Hmm.
but we didn't really know each other. And then we met up again in college because I think it's important to note that although we're both the same age, um, 29, we no, we're both as we record this, we're both 50. But my birthday's in July, your birthday is in September, which means I was ahead of you a year in school,
Yep.
although we're actually the same age. Um, so I remember we knew each other, but then like I went off to a local college, and then you showed up at that college a year later, and we were both in radio class.
This
And
Wookiee convention. That's what did
Wookiee
it for me.
convention. Yes, that's what it was. That's inside baseball that I'm not even sure that we're going to explain. But yes, I already done a year of radio, like college
Hmm.
radio. And then you showed up the year after, and we were both in the radio class. And all I really remember was that like I think we were sitting next to each other in class, and we were just we kind of just were just talking back and forth, and we suddenly somehow realized that we liked all the same shit.
Yes,
Like
yes,
we were both into Hellraiser, we were both into Kiss. Daredevil was both of our favorite comic book character. Yeah, dude.
yes,
Um,
yeah,
but we somehow found out that we were like the same person, and then we just
yep.
like started hanging out from there. And then that began a long tradition of Chinese food and Kiss bootlegs, late into the night on a regular basis.
And when
Um,
you watch the same bootleg like countless times, you just start to pick it apart and rip on it, which is kind of where the whole thing
oh yeah.
started. And so before we were hanging out, I was obviously very familiar with the zine that you were doing, Chamber of Sorrow, and I remember specifically like there was two really great music scenes when we were growing up. There was the punk scene and the death metal scene.
Mhm.
A lot of really incredible bands, and then all the death metal bands had like really kick-ass logos. And then I found out one day that the same cat drew all of them. I'm like, no way. Are you serious? So that's why I first became familiar with your work. And of course, Chamber of Sorrow was an amazing zine.
Oh, thanks.
So
Yeah, I do have. So yeah, we before we even started our zine, I did have like a background in fanzines.
mhm,
Because yeah, me and the late great Jason Verhagen ran Chamber of Sorrow was a death metal zine that ran from about 1991 to 96, I think. We did, I think, 6 issues. And throughout that time, we interviewed um, every death metal band you've ever heard of that started in the 90s. Bands that are famous now, we were reviewing their demos. So I mean, it was very
mhm,
early, the formative, like the peak. I don't know, probably the golden age of death metal, and that zine was distributed, worldwide, and we made a lot of contacts from that. And then from there, I was involved in just a lot of other fanzine projects.
mhm.
Um, whether I was a contributor or doing art for zines. I did some stuff for a Godzilla fanzine from Canada for a long time. Um, some local guys that just did funny fanzines and stuff. I contributed a lot to that. Threw together my own little oddball projects once in a while, and then somehow we decided that we were going to do a zine.
Mhm.
I don't know. Did we decide to do the zine because the convention was coming up, or did we just get a bug up our ass to do a zine?
I think it was the latter. I think it just sounded like it'd be fun.
Yeah,
Like why don't we take some of this ridiculous stuff that we talk about incessantly and just put it on paper?
right.
And for
Yeah,
me, the coolest thing was watching it all come together and watching the artwork come together, which is amazing.
sure. I did a bunch
Yeah.
of little doodles and logos and cartoons and stuff because that's my shtick. I do art. I'm an artist, and I'm currently a professional tattoo artist. For those of you who don't know, I've been doing that for almost 22 years now. So yeah, I can draw a little bit, and starting with my starting with Paul Stanley in kindergarten. I've been drawing him ever since. Um, so yeah, I think it was just that we figured, we watch all these bootlegs and all these videos, and we have opinions on the albums, and we bought the history book, both of us, and yeah, I think we just decided to just throw together a zine and see what happened. And
And basically the MO of the zine was we're gonna have a lot of fun with this. We're gonna rip on the band a bit, but only when appropriate, and we're gonna do so in a way that only like some ridiculous super uber fan possibly could. So
right,
that was fun.
yeah, I kind of always wanted to think of it as like the Mad Magazine of Kiss
Yeah.
fanzines, because like you couldn't make jokes about this stuff unless you're way in over your head already as a fan.
But we
So
did use, if memory serves, we did use the convention as kind of like we need to have it done by because we were
yeah,
gonna bring it to the convention,
we
and I'm
wanted to
glad
give it
we
to the
did
guys. Yeah,
because it's featured in the Ultimate Kiss Fanzine Phenomenon 1976 to 2009 book.
it's true. Which I
Yes.
just so happen to have a copy of right here. Those of you who have seen this book, um, I've got it bookmarked so I don't have to flip through it on camera here. Um, I don't know what page it's on because these pages are not numbered, but amongst the many fans, they have pages and pages of fanzine covers, and it is right there.
There it is.
The red one with the Gina here. You can hold up your copy too, so you can see that's it. That's the one. So it is in this book because, and it's in this book because um, we did bring it to the convention and give it to three of the four members of KISS. But
Just for fun, in addition to Kiss, I think we should list out every living, breathing human being that has a copy of this magazine.
we can do that. We can do that. So yes, in addition to KISS, there is you,
Yes, I got two.
and there is also me.
And Bruce, Eric,
Well, that's what I
and
meant. Kiss,
yeah,
yes, Kiss,
yeah,
Kiss has them too. Yes, we gave them to Bruce, Eric, and Paul.
Paul.
Yes.
And there's one.
We'll get into that. We'll get into that in the next episode, how that went down. But um, yeah, go ahead.
There was one other guy in Minneapolis at the convention that actually bought it, and I'm pretty sure that we bought it back from him on eBay a couple years ago.
We did. We did. So yes, we did sell. I think we had a handful of them because we're in the big cattle thing to to get the autographs, and we did sell one because somebody's like, "Hey, is that a new zine?" I'm like, "Yeah, you wanted it at $1," and we sold it to him. And a couple of years ago, I was just on eBay searching for Kiss fanzines, finding a bunch of like really cool, expensive Japanese Kiss fanzines from the '70s, and lo and be fucking hold, there's a copy of Rip and Destroy for $8. And of course I bought it.
Which is like
And
$1 in 1995.
right, I was gonna say, so like given, how much we probably spent putting it together, and the fact that we only sold one and then I bought it back for $8, we're probably still in the red.
There's still
We're
time.
still in the hole on the zine that we tried to put together 30 years ago. Um, so, and I messaged the guy too, and I'm like, you're never gonna believe this story. He thought it was hilarious. Um, there's just one thing before we keep going. There was when we talk about the philosophy of the fanzine and having fun at Kiss's expense, there is a quote that I want to share um, here from Henry David Thoreau. No, it is from I forget the guy's full name. One of the dudes from the Melvins. Um, Shane, what's his name? Stephen Shane McDonald. Okay, I found this quote years ago, and it 100% it it even though nobody bought the zine and nobody's going to listen to this fucking podcast, it let me know that we are not alone. Okay, so he said in this interview, he goes, "I think a lot of people give Kiss shit that also love Kiss.
Mm.
I think it's kind of fun for a lot of people whose lives have been changed for the better by Kiss to kind of obsess on them. We had an old friend, Bill Bartell." Also known as Pat Fear from the band White Flag, and he was obsessed with Kiss. He was this guy who made his way backstage at Kiss concerts when he was 14 years old through pure obsession. But he would also do things like in the mid 80s, he would wait all day to get in the front row so he could throw bubble gum in Paul Stanley's chest hair. They're fun to do that with for whatever reason. It's not necessarily not a loving thing.
Right, right. I
So
never heard
I
that.
think
I love
that's
it.
like, yeah, but I found that and I saved that because I'm like, that's us. That's us all over. And that's Rip and Destroy.
And I hope that some more people get a chance to read through the zine because not a lot of people saw it, but a lot of really cool things came from it. For example, page 13, there's an article called Encore, and I'm fully convinced that that's what caused the band to reunite in the first place.
For
It was
sure. Yeah.
just a call to
Hint,
arms, like music is boring. Please, for the love of God, will you get back together and do it all over again? And they did. You're welcome.
because yeah, again, just as we're the only Kiss podcast out there, I'm sure we're the only people who asked.
We're the only people who asked for confetti during Rock and Roll All Night. So
Yeah, for
you're
sure.
welcome.
Yeah,
That came
absolutely.
back.
Yep. Yep.
We asked for in the zine, we specifically asked them to spit blood before Unholy, which they did, just not in Dubai.
Right. Yes, they did that was yeah, that was what? That was 95 that we did that zine, and when
Yeah,
was the Rock the Nation tour? Was that 2004, 5-ish?
I
So about
believe it
10 years
was.
later.
Yeah.
10 years later they did it. They did it and we called it.
And the be all end all coolest thing to come from the zine is, in fact, this podcast and a chance to just hang out and
Yeah,
talk
man.
about the band we love.
Hell yeah.
That's all for now. Stay tuned. We're going to cover a lot of great stuff. And rumor has it there's Instagram. There's some way to leave a comment.
There is an Instagram. It is Rip and Destroy Podcast is our username. That's and not Rip and Destroy or Rip ampersand Destroy. It is Rip and Destroy Podcast on Instagram. And there we also set up a YouTube channel, which you may or may not be watching this on, probably. And if you want to send us a message, tell us to fuck right off because I'm sure that's coming. Um, you can email us at rip and destroy podcast, all one word, all lowercase, at gmail.com.
Right on. Thanks for
Cool.
listening.
All
Cheers.
right. Cheers, brother.
Kill the Paul, Phil. Kill the Paul.